Devonte Price was 38 years old, and for 18 months he gave everything he had to a contract overseas. 14-hour days, a foreign city, a bed that wasn't his, all so his wife could have the life she said she wanted. He sent money home faithfully, every single month. Over $140,000 across 18 months, deposited into an account they were supposed to share. He called as often as she'd pick up. He told himself the short answers and the cold silences were just distance, just stress. He was wrong. When he finally walked through his own front door before sunrise, he found his house redecorated with furniture he didn't choose and photographs he didn't recognize. And when he asked where his mother was, his 67-year-old mother, who had raised him alone, his wife pointed toward the backyard. Devonte crossed the yard and opened the shed door. What he found inside would not just end his marriage. It would expose everything his wife believed she had already gotten away with. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The airport was loud even at this hour. Devonte Price sat in a hard plastic chair at Murtala Muhammad International, his carry-on between his feet, his phone in his hand. Around him, the terminal moved the way airports always do. Strangers dragging luggage, a child crying somewhere near the gate, the overhead speakers announcing something in 3 languages. He barely heard any of it. He was looking at Adrienne's name on his screen. Call ended. No answer. He'd tried 4 times now. He told himself she was sleeping. It was early back home. Not even 4 a.m., and Adrienne slept deeply, always had. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and stretched his neck until it cracked. His body was tired in the specific way that 18 months of hard work produces, not broken, just used up and ready to be somewhere else. He was ready to be home. The contract had been good. Great, actually, by any honest measure. A major infrastructure project, bridge assessment and structural rehabilitation across 3 sites outside Lagos. The kind of work that went on his resume and stayed there. The kind of money that changed a family's position. $14,200 a month. Direct deposit every single month for a year and a half. He'd also sent $2,000 extra each month specifically for the house. Utilities, groceries, whatever Adrienne needed. He had done the math before he took the job. He did the math on everything. The house they'd looked at, the one Adrienne had pulled up on her laptop and turned toward him with that smile, had been listed at $387,000. A real house. Room for Mama Ruth. A yard. The kind of place that said we made it in the language people from his neighborhood understood. He'd looked at that listing and said yes, not because he needed the bigger house, but because she did, and she was his wife, and that was how it worked. He boarded the flight at 6:10 a.m., somewhere over the Atlantic, while the cabin lights were dimmed and most passengers were asleep. Devonte sat with his thoughts and let himself be honest, not panicked, not accusatory, just honest. Something had shifted in the last few months. He could track it the way he tracked load stress on a structure. Not dramatic, no sudden collapse, just a slow and measurable change in pressure. Adrienne's calls had gone from 40 minutes to 15, then to 10. She'd started answering questions with questions, or with vague reassurances that didn't quite match what he'd asked. Everything's fine. Stop worrying. Focus on work. There had been a weekend in March when she hadn't called at all, and when he called her, she'd sounded like a woman being interrupted rather than a wife hearing from her husband. He had filed it under distance, under stress. Under 18 months is a long time, and it's hard on both of us. He was a fair man. He believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, until the doubt became a structure he couldn't ignore. He closed his eyes and let himself feel something simpler. He was going home. He was going to walk through his front door, and Mama Ruth would probably be up early the way she always was, coffee already made, and she would hug him the way only his mother could, like she was pressing every worry back out of him through her arms. That was what he held onto for the remaining hours of the flight. The rideshare smelled like pine air freshener and old leather. He hadn't called anyone to pick him up. He didn't want to bother Uncle Floyd at this hour, and Adrian wasn't answering, so he'd opened the app and requested a car and watched his city come back to him through rain-spotted glass. It was 6:47 a.m. when the car turned onto his street. He noticed the house before the driver even slowed down. It looked different. Fresh paint, a shade darker than he remembered, a deep charcoal gray that hadn't been there when he left. New outdoor furniture on the front porch, all-weather wicker stuff, a matching set, the kind that came from a catalog, a potted plant flanking each side of the door, manicured and intentional. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the car pulled away, just looking. She redecorated, he thought. Okay, she had time. It's fine. He let himself in with his key. The smell hit him first. Something new. A candle or a diffuser. Something that wasn't the smell of his house. He stood in the entryway and looked at the living room. New rug. New throw pillows on the couch. The side table he and Mama Ruth had picked out together at an estate sale, the one with the small chip on the left leg that he'd always meant to fix, was gone, replaced by something sleek and unfamiliar. And on the wall above the console table, where a framed photo had always hung, him and Mama Ruth at his graduate school commencement, her in her good church dress, both of them grinning, there was a different photo now. Adrienne. 4 women he didn't recognize, sunglasses and wine glasses, laughing at whoever held the camera. He stood there for a moment, looking at those strangers on his wall. He called out. No answer. He set his bags down slowly and moved through the quiet house, the kitchen, the hallway. He stopped outside the master bedroom. He raised his hand and knocked. The door was locked. He knocked again. A long pause. Then the sound of movement behind the door. Slow, deliberate, the kind that said, I heard you the first time. The lock clicked. Adrian opened the door wrapped in a silk robe, dark burgundy, the belt tied loose at her waist. Her hair was wrapped. Her face was not sleepy. That was the thing he noticed first. Her eyes were alert and sharp, the way a person looks when they've been awake and chose not to answer. The irritation on her face was quick, barely there, but he saw it. 18 months away didn't change the fact that he knew this woman's face. You didn't say you were coming in today, she said. I told you Thursday. I've been calling since yesterday. She stepped back from the doorway, not quite an invitation. My phone was on silent. He didn't step inside the room. He stood in the doorframe and looked at her, and she leaned forward slightly and offered her cheek toward him the way someone offers a pen. Functional? Impersonal? Done? He didn't move toward it. Where's my mother? He asked. Something crossed her face. Just a flicker. She turned and walked toward the bathroom, robe trailing behind her. She's out back, Adrienne said, over her shoulder. He stood still. What does that mean? Adrienne had already reached the bathroom door. She paused with her hand on the frame. She has everything she needs, Devante. I made sure of that. She went inside. The door didn't close all the way. Not a slam, just shut. And he heard the faucet turn on. He stood in the hallway. Out back. He walked through the kitchen, past the new bar stools he didn't recognize, past a fruit bowl that was purely decorative, out through the back door and into the early morning yard. The grass was wet. The sky was pale gray and quiet. At the far end of the yard, past the oak tree and the garden bed Mama Ruth had planted years ago, sat the shed. It was the same old structure. Wood panel siding, sloped roof. The door with the latch he'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. He'd kept lawn equipment in it. A workbench. Boxes of off-season things. He walked toward it with measured steps. His chest was very still. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open. The space heater was running, ticking low. The lamp on the folding table threw a dim yellow light over everything. He saw the cot first. Narrow, a folded quilt on top, a pillow that had been fluffed and set just so. Then the small TV on a plastic crate, the folding table, and on the table, lined up with the kind of care that told you everything about the person who placed them there. A glass of water, a pair of reading glasses, and his mother's Bible, its spine worn soft from decades of use. Mama Ruth was sitting on the edge of the cot, fully dressed, hands folded in her lap. She looked up when the light changed. For one moment, just one, and it was over fast. Her face came apart. 18 months of something she had never once put in a phone call broke the surface all at once. He saw it. He saw the relief, the love, the thing underneath that looked like shame, even though she had done nothing in this world to be ashamed of. Her eyes went bright, and her chin moved. Then she pressed her lips together. She straightened her spine. She smiled. "Baby," she said, "you're home." He stepped inside and crossed to her in 3 strides and went down on one knee beside the cot, right there on the plywood floor, his dress shoes in the dirt. "Mama." His voice came out low. He took her hands in both of his. "I'm all right," she said, right away. The first thing she said. "How long?" She looked at him. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. "A while, baby. How long?" She looked down at their hands. "About 3 weeks after you left." He said nothing. He sat with that number. 3 weeks. He had been gone 18 months. She had been out here for nearly all of it. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because what were you going to do?" Her voice was gentle, not accusatory. "You were across an ocean. You couldn't come home." "I didn't want you carrying it on top of everything else." She squeezed his fingers. "I was fine. I kept myself fine." He looked around the shed, and she had. That was the part that made it harder, not easier. The way she had taken this small, wrong space and imposed order on it anyway. The quilt folded with hospital corners, her shoes placed side by side under the cot. A small basket on the floor holding her lotions and her medicine, each bottle upright, each label facing out. A hook on the wall where her good coat hung. She had made dignity out of what she'd been handed, the way she had always done, the way she had done his whole life, the way she should never have had to do again. He stood up. He didn't say anything. He looked at the coat on the hook, the Bible on the table, the small TV from a decade ago. He looked at his mother sitting on that cot, with her hands folded and her back straight. He turned and walked back to the house. Adrian had found time to do her makeup. That was the first thing he registered when he walked back through the door. She was standing at the kitchen island in the burgundy robe, but her face was fully done now. Foundation, liner, the works. Her hair was still wrapped, but the rest of her was polished and composed, like she was expecting a camera. She was scrolling her phone with one thumb, coffee mug near her elbow, the picture of a woman who had nothing on her mind. She glanced up when he came in. "You want coffee?" she asked. He pulled out a bar stool and sat down on the opposite side of the island. He folded his hands on the counter and looked at her steadily. "I need you to explain to me what happened with my mother." Adrian set her phone down. She exhaled, slow, patient. The breath of someone who had been waiting for a conversation they found exhausting before it even started. She reached for her mug. "Devante." Her voice was measured, reasonable, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this. "Your mother and I have very different ideas about how a household should run." "Okay, tell me." She went through my things, my bathroom, my closet. She would come into the kitchen when I was entertaining and insert herself into conversations she had no business being in. My friends were uncomfortable. I had a life to manage while you were gone, and she made that harder than it needed to be. He listened. He let her go. She listed 3 more incidents, Each one detailed, each one delivered with the patient clarity of someone reading from a rehearsed document. He noticed the fluency of it, how smoothly it moved. He noticed she never once looked away from him, because she knew that looking away looked like lying. When she finished, he asked, "Why didn't you call me?" "Because I handled it. You put a 67-year-old woman in a shed. I gave her a space of her own." Her chin lifted slightly. She had heat. She had her television, her things. She was comfortable. She had a cot, Adrienne. She had privacy. She set her mug down. I was accommodating a situation that was not easy for me. I never asked for a live-in. She is my mother. And this is my house. The words came out quick, clipped. She caught herself, smoothed her expression. Our house. I'm just saying I had a right to set boundaries in my own home. He looked at her calmly. A shed is not a boundary. A shed is not appropriate housing for any person, let alone my mother. She's 67 years old. She retired. I brought her here so she wouldn't have to be alone. Something shifted in Adrienne's face. The composure was still there, but the seams were showing now. A tightness around her jaw, a flatness behind her eyes. She picked up her phone again, not to look at it, just to have something in her hand. "I don't need a lecture," she said. "I did what I had to do. Frankly." She looked up. "She's lucky I didn't throw her out on the street. I was being generous." The kitchen was very quiet. Devante looked at his wife for a long moment. He took in the makeup and the silk robe and the coffee mug and the phone. He took in the steadiness with which she held his gaze, certain, absolutely certain, that she had just made her position clear, and that clarity would settle things. He said, "Okay." He stood up, pushed the bar stool back into place, and walked out through the back door. He spent the day in the shed. He brought 2 folding chairs from the garage, set them up so they faced each other, and he and Mama Ruth sat in that small space and talked the way they used to talk when he was a teenager. Unhurried, honest, nothing held back. She made him eat something. She had crackers and peanut butter in a Ziploc bag, and she gave him some like he was 12 years old, and he ate them without argument. She talked. He listened. He learned that Adrienne had moved her out 23 days after his flight departed. Not after an incident, not after a confrontation. 23 days after the wheels left the ground. The reasons came later, assembled after the fact. Mama Ruth knew the difference. She talked about the deliveries, boxes arriving 2 and 3 times a week, furniture mostly, things for rooms she wasn't allowed in anymore. She talked about the man. He came on Tuesdays and Thursdays at first, then more often. Adrienne called him a decorator. He carried no samples, no swatches, no portfolio. He stayed for hours. He drove a silver Audi. She talked about the ATM card, a card she'd never seen before, dark matte, no bank logo she recognized. She'd seen Adrienne use it at the grocery store once, sliding it quick like she didn't want it to be noticed. Then she reached under the cot. She pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind you find in a drugstore for $2. She held it out to him. "I wrote things down," she said simply. "Dates. What I saw. I didn't know if it would matter. I just thought someone should keep a record." He opened it. Her handwriting was small and even, the same handwriting that had signed his permission slips and birthday cards his entire life. Dates in the left margin. Observations beside them. Amounts, descriptions, initials. 3 pages of it. He read every word. He closed the notebook and held it in both hands for a moment. Then he looked up at her. "Pack your things, Mama. You're sleeping in the guest room tonight." Her eyes searched his face. She nodded once. She didn't argue, didn't say she was fine, didn't try to protect him from the decision. She just nodded, like she'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. He carried her things himself. 2 trips across the yard, the quilt folded over his arm, the basket of her bottles, her coat, her Bible. He made up the guest room properly, moved a lamp so the light was better, and sat with her while she settled in. When she fell asleep in a real bed, in a real room, under a real roof, he went to the kitchen. He sat down at the table. He opened his laptop. He pulled up their bank accounts. The house was quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. Empty quiet. The kind of stillness that lives in a space after something has been taken out of it. Devante sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open and the overhead light off. Just the screen. Just the glow. He'd made himself a glass of water he hadn't touched. The notebook, Mama Ruth's notebook, was open beside the keyboard, her small handwriting patient and precise in the margins. He pulled up the joint account. He had done the math in his head on the way home from the airport, the way he always did math. Quietly, automatically, the numbers arranging themselves without being asked. The Lagos contract paid $14,200 a month. Direct deposit. He had wired an additional $2,000 a month for household expenses. 18 months. He had not touched a dollar of it beyond what he needed to live and eat there. He had been building something. He had been certain he was building something. The balance on the screen read $11,400. He sat back. He looked at the number. He let it be real. Then he pulled up the transaction history and started reading. It took him 2 hours to build the spreadsheet. He was a structural engineer. He worked in grids and columns, load calculations and precise margins, and he treated the account the same way he would treat a failure report. Line by line. Date, amount, description. He wasn't looking for a story yet. He was just gathering material. The transfers started 6 weeks after his departure. Not immediately. There was a window of normal activity first, groceries and utilities, and the usual rhythm of a household. Then, on a Tuesday in week 7, the first one, $3,400, transferred out. The receiving account number meant nothing to him. No bank name he recognized, no memo. He made a column for those transfers. Over the next 18 months, they came 41 times. Never the same amount twice. Never round numbers, always something like $3,175 or $4,120 or $2,140. The variation was deliberate. He understood why immediately. Automated fraud alerts trigger on patterns, round numbers, repeated amounts, consistent timing. Whoever structured these transfers understood how joint accounts worked. Understood how to stay invisible inside the noise of normal spending. The 41 transfers totaled $140,200. He sat with that number. $140,000. Moved across 18 months, carefully, methodically, by someone who had planned ahead. He thought about the fluency of Adrienne's grievance list that morning, the way she never looked away. He thought about what fluency in deception actually required. Not just nerve, but preparation. Time. He added a column. Total contract earnings. Total household expenses. Total remaining. He cross-referenced the utility payments, the insurance, the mortgage. Everything that should have been paid had been paid. Right on schedule. That was important to note. She wasn't stealing from the bills. She was stealing from the surplus, from the future, from the reason he had gone. At 2:17 in the morning, he saved the spreadsheet, closed the laptop, and went to bed. He did not sleep well, but he slept. The following evening, he drove west on Elmwood until he was 3 miles from the house, pulled into an empty lot beside a closed dry cleaner, and called Uncle Floyd. Floyd picked up on the second ring. "You're home," Floyd said. It wasn't a question. He had a voice like gravel and certainty. The voice of a man who had been right about enough things for long enough that he no longer felt the need to perform surprise. "Got in yesterday morning. How's Ruth?" "She's in the guest room now. She's okay." Floyd let out a breath. Not relief exactly. More like the release of something he'd been holding without meaning to. Good. That's good. Devante looked out through the windshield at the empty parking lot. A fast food bag was pressed against the chain-link fence. He watched it. "Floyd, tell me what you saw." A pause. "I've been going by the house," Floyd said. "You know I go by. I wasn't surveilling anybody, I drive past. Check the lights. Make sure Ruth's light was on in the morning." "I know. The man wasn't a decorator, Devante." "I know that too. His name's Brandon. That's all I got. First name. From something Ruth said once when I saw her out in the yard. She said Adrienne introduced him as a friend. A friend who showed up in a silver Audi on weekday afternoons." Floyd's voice was flat. Not angry, just accurate. "Second time I saw his car, I took a picture." Devante was quiet. "I took it because I trust what I feel in my stomach," Floyd said. "And my stomach said that car was going to matter eventually. Text it to me." The photo arrived 30 seconds later. A silver Audi A6, parked in front of the house, angled so the driver's side was toward the street. Florida plates. A clear shot of the tag. Devante saved the image. "Thank you, Floyd." "Don't thank me, just—" Floyd stopped. Then, quieter. "Handle it right." "I will." He ended the call. He sat in the empty lot for a moment, the phone warm in his hand, the photo saved to his camera roll. Then he pulled up his browser and typed in the license plate number. He called her at 9:15 in the morning, while Adrienne was in the shower. "Petra," he kept his voice easy, warm even. "Hey, I'm back in town. I know it's been a while. I was hoping we could do lunch, catch up a little." A brief pause on her end, then, "Oh, Devante. Yeah, of course. Welcome back." She sounded genuinely pleased, which meant she didn't know he knew anything. Or she was better at this than he expected. He didn't think she was better at this than he expected. They agreed on a place, a sandwich spot on Fairfield. Casual. The kind of place where nobody sat too close, and the tables had enough space between them. He chose it deliberately. Petra Holloway was 29 years old and looked like a softer draft of her sister. Same jawline, same dark eyes. But where Adrienne's face was always composed and considered, Petra's showed whatever she was feeling, usually a half-second before she could catch it. She was already at the table when he arrived, hands around an iced tea, a little smile when she saw him. "You look good," she said. "Tired, but good. 18 months will do that." He sat down, settled his jacket on the back of the chair. "You look good, too. Still at the same job?" "Yeah, assistant manager now, actually." "That's real. Congratulations." She smiled wider at that, and he could see she meant it. She wasn't used to people treating that like an accomplishment worth acknowledging. He filed that away. He ordered a water and a turkey sandwich and let the first 20 minutes belong entirely to her. He talked about Lagos, the heat, the traffic that made their city look like a quiet suburb, the project itself, a bridge rehabilitation, the kind of work he found genuinely satisfying even when it exhausted him. He described the crew he worked with, a few small, funny stories, the food he missed from home. He asked about her apartment, whether she'd gotten the leaky faucet fixed, remembered she'd mentioned it on a call almost a year ago. She looked surprised that he remembered. People always looked surprised when he remembered. By the time the food arrived, her shoulders had dropped 2 inches. He took a few bites, let a natural pause open. Then, casually, not leaning forward, not changing his tone, he said, "Hey, I don't want to make this weird, but I've been going through some account stuff since I got back. Just routine, getting organized. And I found a few transfers I don't recognize." He shook his head slightly. "Probably nothing. I just want to understand them before I bring it up to Adrienne. I don't want to accuse her of something if there's an explanation I'm missing, you know?" Petra had her water glass in her hand. She put it down without drinking. He watched her face do something complicated. Her eyes moved to the table, then back to him, then to a spot just past his shoulder. A small muscle in her jaw moved. He waited. He was good at waiting. "Devante," her voice was careful, quiet. "I told her not to—" She stopped. The silence between them was very still. He didn't press. He didn't shift in his seat or change his expression. He just looked at her, not hard, not demanding, just present, and said, "I'm not here to put you in the middle of anything. Whatever you tell me, your name stays out of it. You have my word on that." He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said everything that mattered. "I just need to understand what I'm looking at." Petra looked at him for a long moment. He watched her make a decision. She set the water glass to the side, folded her hands on the table. "Brandon Ossie," she said. "That's his name. He's a real estate investor. He and Adrian they've been together for at least 2 years. She said it carefully, like she was choosing each word off a shelf. "It started before you left, before the contract." Devante said nothing. He held very still. The money she moved, she and Brandon set up an LLC, together. She used the transfers to fund it. They bought a duplex with it, a property on the east side, Devante, over on Halcourt. Petra's voice dropped lower. "She's been planning to file for divorce. She told me it would be soon, within the next few weeks. She was going to tell the court the duplex was hers, her own investment, her own money. She was going to say, 'You had no involvement.'" He picked up his water glass, drank from it slowly, set it back down. "She wanted it in place first," Petra said, "so she could use it in the settlement. Get more." She exhaled. "I told her it was wrong. I told her that more than once." He nodded. "Once. I know you did," he said. And he meant it. He paid for lunch. He walked Petra to her car, told her again that her name was her own, shook her hand because it felt like the right thing, formal, a sealing of something, and watched her drive away. Then he got in his car, pulled the door shut, and dialed Delia Okafor's office. The office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, quiet and well-organized in a way that felt deliberate. No clutter, no stacks of paper tipping off the edge of desks. The bookshelves were full but orderly, case volumes lined up even, spines facing out. A small plant in the corner was alive and clearly attended to. The whole room said, "Things are handled here." Delia Okafor was already at her desk when the assistant showed Devante in. She stood briefly to shake his hand, a firm, efficient grip, and gestured to the chair across from her. She was 44, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She wore a dark blazer and no jewelry except small gold studs. She looked like a woman who had already thought about whatever problem you were about to bring her. Devante sat down. He placed the folder on the desk between them. "Take your time," she said. He opened it. He walked her through it, the same way he'd have walked a client through a project assessment, starting from the structure, working down to the details, the contract, the deposit amounts, the joint account balance when he left, 18 months ago, versus what he found when he looked 3 nights ago. The spreadsheet he'd built, printed on 2 pages, every transfer logged with date, amount, and running total. He placed that on the desk. Then the LLC search he'd run on Brandon's name, which he'd tracked from the license plate Floyd photographed, the formation date, the registered address, the filing agent. Then the photo itself, Floyd's image of Brandon's silver Lexus parked in front of Devante's house, timestamp visible in the corner. Then the county property record for the duplex on Halcourt, which he had pulled himself, showing both Brandon's name and the LLC. Last, he placed Mama Ruth's notebook flat on the desk, small, spiral-bound, the cover worn soft from handling. He didn't explain it yet. Delia didn't interrupt once. She looked at each document as he set it down, sometimes picking one up and reading it fully, sometimes just scanning it and setting it aside at a precise angle. Her face gave away almost nothing. She was not surprised. She was not horrified. She was reading, the way a doctor reads a chart, absorbing information, not performing reaction. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You haven't confronted her yet, she said. No. Good. She moved the spreadsheet to the center of the desk, glanced at it one more time, then looked back at him. Here's where you are. The $140,000 that was transferred out of your joint account, without your knowledge, without your consent, to fund a business venture with a third party. That is not a marital disagreement. That is civil fraud. Depending on how a prosecutor reads the intent, it could rise to criminal conversion. That's a separate track, and we may not need to go there, but it is available to us. She tapped the LLC document. The duplex on Halcourt is marital property. It doesn't matter how it's titled, and it doesn't matter what story she intended to tell the court. It was purchased with marital funds during the marriage without your knowledge. Her attorney will argue otherwise. They will lose. She picked up the Halcourt property record and set it in a separate stack she was apparently building. Here's what we do. We file for divorce. I'll have that ready within 10 days. Attached to the filing is an emergency motion for an asset freeze. Everything. The joint account, the LLC, the duplex. The court will grant it. The standard for emergency relief is met by what's in this folder. She paused. We then pursue the full value of the duplex as part of the equitable distribution. Given the documented misappropriation, we're in a strong position to argue you are entitled to considerably more than half. She folded her hands. In the meantime, you go home and you change nothing. Same routine, same behavior. You do not confront her. You do not move out. You do not give her any signal that legal proceedings are coming. Can you do that? Yes. Today, before you go home, you go to your bank and you redirect your direct deposit to a new individual account. Not joint. Her name is not on it. You do that today. Understood. One more thing. She reached across the desk and rested 2 fingers lightly on Mama Ruth's notebook. What is this? He told her. He described the shed, the cot, the space heater, the dim lamp. He described his mother's face when she looked up and saw him in the doorway. He told her how long it had been going on. 3 weeks after he left, he now knew. He kept his voice level. He kept his hands still. Delia listened without moving. Then she said, I want photographs of the shed before anything changes. Exterior and interior. I want the dates she was moved there. The conditions. Cold, heat, proximity to the house. All of it. And I want your mother's account of her experience in her own handwriting, signed and dated. She picked up the notebook and turned it over once in her hands. The shed is actually useful to us. He went to the bank first, opened a new checking account, individual, and submitted the direct deposit redirect form at the counter. The banker made small talk. He answered it. He drove home. The backyard was quiet. Late afternoon light sat low across the fence, throwing long shadows over the grass. He stood at the back door for a moment before stepping out. He crossed the yard. The shed door opened with the same soft drag it always had, the bottom edge scraping the concrete just slightly. Inside, it was empty now. He'd moved Mama Ruth's things out 2 days ago, but it still smelled like her, faintly. Lavender and something warm, a lotion she used. The cot frame was still there, folded and leaned against the wall. The lamp cord coiled on the floor beside the outlet. The folding table still in the corner. Nothing on it but a ring-shaped mark where her Bible had sat for months. He took out his phone. He photographed the exterior first. The door, the latch, the single small window with the cracked caulking around the frame. Then the interior. The cot, the lamp, the folding table, the outlet with the space heater's cord still snaking out of it. He photographed the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Low, bare plywood, a single bulb hanging from a wire at the center. He got close to the window from inside and photographed the view it offered. A wedge of grass, the back fence, and a corner of the house. Then he stood still for a moment. The light outside was going. He could see it changing at the edges of the small window, the sky softening from pale yellow to something grayer. He took one more photograph, the whole room, from the doorway, everything in it that was left. Then he walked back to the house. The morning after he met with Delia, Devante made breakfast, not because he was hungry, because it was what he did on mornings when he was home. He made eggs and toast and poured 2 cups of coffee. And when Adrienne came downstairs in her silk robe with her hair wrapped, he slid a mug across the counter to her the same way he had 100 times before. She looked at him. He looked back. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She picked up the mug. "You sleep okay?" "Slept fine." She watched him another second, like she was checking for something she couldn't quite name. Then she sat down at the island and pulled out her phone, and breakfast became ordinary. And that was exactly what he needed. He moved through those 10 days the same way he moved through every difficult project, steadily, without wasted motion, keeping the surface smooth while the structure underneath took shape. He went to work. He called his project manager about the local contract he was transitioning to, handled the paperwork, answered emails. He cooked dinner twice that week because he had always cooked sometimes, and stopping would mean something. He watched television in the evenings, sitting in the same chair he always sat in. He did not avoid Adrienne. He did not seek her out. She noticed the distance anyway. People like Adrienne always do. They are finely tuned to subtle shifts because they run on calculation, and calculation requires accurate information. She started recalibrating. On the 5th night, she suggested dinner out, just the 2 of them, a place downtown they used to go before he left for Lagos. Good food, low lighting, the kind of restaurant that feels like a conversation even when no one is saying much. He said yes. She wore a red dress and earrings he'd given her 2 Christmases ago. She was warm and funny and asked questions about his work and laughed in the right places. She touched his hand across the table once, lightly, and left her hand there a moment. She was very good at this. He had always known she was good at this. He smiled. He asked about her friends, the women in the photos on the wall he didn't recognize. He refilled her wine when the glass got low. He listened the way he always had, attentive, patient, present. He thought about $140,000. He thought about the lavender smell still sitting in that shed. He smiled again and asked if she wanted dessert. Floyd came by on the 7th day, on a Saturday, under the cover of returning a socket wrench he'd borrowed before Devante left for Lagos. A wrench Floyd had, in fact, borrowed, which was the kind of thing Floyd did to keep his comings and goings credible. Adrienne was out. Floyd had timed it, because Floyd always timed things, even when he pretended not to. He spent 20 minutes in the kitchen with Mama Ruth. Devante heard them talking low, Mama Ruth's soft laugh once at something Floyd said. When Floyd came to find Devante in the garage, he had a folded sheet of paper in his shirt pocket and a prepaid phone in his hand. "For your mama," he said, holding up the phone. "She only calls us on this, not her old line." He looked at Devante steady. "I don't want that woman knowing who Ruth is talking to." Devante took the phone and nodded. Floyd pulled out the folded paper. "Brandon Coates, that's the full name. My contact at the county ran him." He unfolded it and handed it over. 2 civil judgments against him. Both real estate disputes, both settled out of court. First one was 4 years ago. A contractor he stiffed on a rehab project. Second was 2 years back. A co-investor who claimed he restructured the deal terms after the money was in. Devante read the sheet once, carefully, folded it along the same crease, and set it on the workbench beside the folder he kept in the locked drawer. Floyd watched him. "You good?" Floyd asked. "I'm good." Floyd looked like he had more to say, and decided against it. He picked up his socket wrench off the workbench and headed for the door. At the threshold, he stopped. "She's going to feel it coming," he said, "before she knows what it is. Women like that Always do. Devante didn't say anything. Floyd left. That same evening, Mama Ruth found him on the back porch, sitting with a glass of water, looking out at the yard where the shed still stood empty. She lowered herself into the chair beside him, slow and careful, the way she always moved now in the evenings when her knees stiffened up. She looked out at the same yard. Neither of them spoke for a while. "What are you doing?" she asked. Quiet, not accusing, just asking the way she used to ask when he was young, and she already knew the answer, but wanted to hear him say it. "Making sure you never have to apologize for being in your son's home again." She was quiet for a long moment. "Don't let rage make you sloppy," she said. "I'm not raging." He took a slow sip of water. "I'm building." She looked at him. He felt her looking, the way he had felt it his whole life. Steady, searching, and full of something too large to name. Then she nodded once, and they sat together until the light went all the way out. Day 9, Adrienne's phone rang after dinner. She glanced at the screen from across the room. Something in her went still, just for a fraction of a second, the way a person freezes when they read something they weren't expecting. Then she stood up easily and said, "I'll take this in the other room," and walked down the hall. The door didn't close all the way. He didn't move toward it. He didn't need to. She was in there for 11 minutes. When she came back out, she was smiling. But it was the kind of smile that had been assembled quickly. The pieces not quite flush. She said it was a friend. Asked if he wanted anything from the kitchen. He said, "No, thank you." She went to the kitchen anyway, and stayed there longer than she needed to. Something had shifted, and she knew it. She just couldn't name what. Day 10. Devante was in his home office at mid-morning when his phone lit up on the desk. "Delia Okafor." He picked up. "We filed this morning," she said. They were at a diner 3 miles from the house, a small booth by the window, coffee going cold in front of both of them. Floyd talking about a neighbor's fence dispute that had apparently consumed the entire block for the past 3 weeks. Devante was listening. Not fully, but enough. The morning light came through the glass at a low angle and lay across the table in a flat stripe. He turned his mug slowly in his hands. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. He looked down. Served. 11:04 a.m. He set the phone face up on the table. Floyd glanced at it, read the message, and stopped talking about the fence. He picked up his coffee and drank and didn't say anything, which was the most useful thing he could have done. Devante looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into her trunk. A man walked by with a dog on a leash. The world was going about its business the way it always did, completely indifferent to the fact that across town, in the kitchen of his house, a process server had just handed his wife a set of documents that were going to dismantle everything she thought she had built. He let that sit for a moment. Then he finished his coffee and picked up the check. He pulled into the driveway at just past 1 o'clock. The house was quiet from the outside. Same as always. Same landscaping. Same front door. Same crack in the driveway he kept meaning to seal. Inside, Adrienne was at the kitchen island. The papers were in front of her, face up, spread slightly the way papers get when someone has been reading them and trying to look like they haven't. She was dressed, not casually, actually dressed, like she had made a decision about how she wanted to look when he came home. Her hands were folded on the counter. She had done her makeup. She looked up when he came in. Her expression was measured, careful. "Can we talk?" she asked. He set his keys on the counter by the door. He walked to the island and sat down across from her. She began. She said that the papers were a shock, that she understood he was hurt, that she had made mistakes she wasn't proud of. She said the distance of the last 18 months had been hard on both of them, that she had felt alone and had handled that loneliness badly, and that she was not making excuses, just asking him to understand the full picture. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she believed in their marriage, in what they had built together, and that she did not want to throw it away over something that could be repaired. She said counseling might help. She said they could rebuild. She said all of it smoothly, sincerely, even. She had clearly prepared this, the pacing of it, the places where she softened her voice, the way she looked at him with something that resembled genuine pain. It was a good performance. Under different circumstances, it might have worked. But it was written for a version of him that didn't exist anymore. A man who came home and found a wife, not a spreadsheet. She was delivering lines to someone who had already left the room. He let her finish. The kitchen was quiet. Then he reached into the folder he had carried in and placed 3 documents on the island between them. The first was the itemized transfer summary, 18 months of withdrawals, dates and amounts and destination account, organized in a clean table he had built himself. The second was the LLC filing, Brandon Coates and Adrian Holloway Price listed as co-members, formation date stamped 7 months into his Lagos contract. The third was Floyd's photograph. Brandon's car parked in front of Devontae's house, license plate sharp and clear in afternoon light. He placed them in a row. Then he looked up at her. "I don't want counseling, Adrian," he said. "I want my money, and I want my house." She looked at the documents. The performance ended. Not dramatically. It didn't collapse or break. It simply stopped, the way a light goes off. And what was underneath was something colder and more honest than anything she'd shown him all morning. Her eyes moved across the transfer summary, across the LLC filing, across the photograph. She was still calculating. He could see it. The search for the remaining angle, the inventory of what was still usable, what could still be argued. There was nothing. He tapped the top page. "Delia Okafor's contact information is right there. The emergency asset freeze on the LLC was already granted by the court this morning. The duplex is locked." He stood up. "You need to speak with your own attorney today." He pushed back from the island, picked up his folder, and walked out of the kitchen. Adrian sat alone at the island. The documents were in front of her, exactly where he had left them. She looked at them for a long moment. The transfer summary with her own careful withdrawals printed out in black ink. 18 months of her own precision turned into evidence. The LLC filing with her name on it. The photograph. She picked up her phone. He made the calls the next morning. Short ones. No explanations. Just the ask. Uncle Floyd first. "Dinner tonight, 6 o'clock. It's important." Floyd said he'd be there and didn't ask why. Then Floyd's wife, Aunt Cora, who had known Mama Ruth since before Devontae was born. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Then Petra. That one he was careful with. He kept his voice easy, the same way he had at lunch. He said he was getting the family together, and he'd like her there. A pause on her end, not long, but present. Then she said, "Okay." He didn't call Adrian. She was in the house. She would see what she would see. He started cooking at 4. Mama Ruth came into the kitchen while he was pulling things from the cabinet and stood in the doorway watching him. He had her recipes written out on index cards, her actual handwriting, the ones she kept in the small tin box she'd brought from her room, and he had them lined up on the counter like a project plan. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. He was already cutting onions. "Go sit down." "Let me do this." She watched him for another moment. Then she went and sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands and was quiet, which was its own kind of presence. The kitchen filled up with smell. Onion softening in butter. The particular warmth of cornbread beginning to set in the oven. Smells that belonged to her. He wanted that to be intentional. Floyd and Cora arrived at 10 to 6. Cora went straight to Mama Ruth and held both her hands and didn't let go for a while. Floyd came into the kitchen, looked at the stove, looked at Devontae, and gave a short nod. He sat down at the table and left Devontae to cook. Petra arrived at 6, alone. She stood in the entryway and looked at who was there. Floyd at the table, Cora with Mama Ruth, Devante at the stove, and her expression did something quiet and complicated. She set her purse down and said hello to everyone and found a seat near the window. Adrienne came downstairs at 6:15. She walked into the dining room and stopped. She saw the table, set for 6, her good dishes, candles already lit. She saw Floyd and Cora. She saw Petra. She saw Mama Ruth, seated at the head of the table in a chair she hadn't occupied since before Devante left the country. She saw Devante carrying food in from the kitchen, calm and unhurried, like a man in his own house. She understood immediately. She stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Then she walked to the remaining chair and sat down. Devante set the last dish on the table, pulled out his chair, and sat. He looked around at the people present. Then he said, "Thank you all for coming. I need to tell you something." He told them. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't editorialize. He laid it out the way he had laid out the documents on the kitchen island, in order, with precision. He started with the shed. He described what he found the morning he came home: the cot, the space heater, the lamp that belonged in a garage. He told them Mama Ruth had been moved out there within 3 weeks of his departure. He told them she had stayed there for months, in silence, to protect him from worrying while he was overseas and couldn't do anything about it. Then he looked at his mother. "Mama, I'd like you to tell them what it was like. In your own words." Mama Ruth was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked up. She spoke simply and without drama, the way she did everything. She described the night Adrienne told her she was moving to the outdoor room. Not the shed. Adrienne had called it the outdoor room. Like language could renovate a storage space. She described the cold in the first weeks, before she thought to put a towel along the bottom of the door. She described eating her meals alone, at the folding table, and not calling her son because she knew he was 11 hours away, and the contract was almost done, and she did not want to be the reason he lost focus. She said it plainly. Every word of it landed. Floyd did not look at Adrienne once during any of this. Not once. He kept his eyes on his plate, or on Mama Ruth, or on Devante. The absence of his gaze was its own kind of verdict. Petra was crying. She wasn't making a sound. She had a napkin pressed to the corner of her eye, and she was looking at the table and trying to hold it together. She was not succeeding. Adrienne waited until Mama Ruth finished. Then she drew a breath and began to speak, her voice controlled, beginning to build toward context, toward counter-narrative, toward the version where her choices had reasons. Devante looked at her. "You will not defend yourself in this house," he said, quietly. "Absolutely." She stopped. The table was still. No one spoke. The candles burned. The food sat mostly untouched. After a moment, Floyd picked up his fork, and that small motion, that ordinary, unimpressed motion, broke something in the room. One by one, people began to eat. Adrienne did not finish her plate. She sat through the remainder of the meal in silence, and when the table began to clear, she stood, and without a word to anyone, she walked out of the dining room. The bedroom door closed behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a moment, not turning on the light. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep, asking what was wrong. Adrienne opened her mouth. For the first time, not when the papers were served, not when she saw the documents on the island, not when she looked across the dinner table and understood what Devante had built. She was genuinely afraid. 6 months later, the kitchen smelled like butter and coffee and something sweet in the oven. The walls were a different color now. A deep, warm green, not the gray Adrienne had chosen because she saw it in a magazine, but a real color, a living color. the kind that made a room feel like someone actually lived there. Devante had painted it himself on a Saturday in February. Mama Ruth sitting at the kitchen table telling him he was going too fast on the edges. He wasn't going too fast, but he let her say it. She was at the stove now, one hand on the skillet, the other resting on the counter. She moved through this kitchen differently than she used to. Not carefully, not like a guest negotiating borrowed space, but like a woman who knew where everything was because it was hers to know. Devante poured 2 cups of coffee and set one near her elbow without being asked. "Thank you, baby," she said, not turning around. He sat at the kitchen table with his own cup and opened his laptop. A local infrastructure contract, a pedestrian bridge 2 miles from the house. Short hours, home before dark every evening. He had taken a pay cut to have it, and he had not regretted it once. The duplex sat 20 minutes away, converting itself into equity 1 tenant payment at a time. Brandon had settled fast. Delia said that was typical. Men like that calculated the cost of litigation against the cost of surrender and chose the cheaper option without sentiment. The LLC was dissolved. The duplex transferred fully to Devante as part of the civil settlement. Brandon had stepped away from Adrienne the same week, which surprised no one who had been paying attention. There was nothing left to invest in. Adrienne's divorce settlement had been minimal. Her attorney had apparently delivered the news about the house, that Devante had bought it 2 years before they married, that it was his separate property, and had always been his separate property, in the same flat tone attorneys used when the answer was simply no. She took what was offered. She moved out in 30 days. She was at Petra's now. Petra's apartment was small. Devante knew this not because anyone told him, but because he knew what Petra's salary was, and he knew the neighborhood. He did not spend time thinking about it. Floyd came to dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays now, regular as weather. He always brought something, a bag of fruit, a box of something from the bakery on Morrison, once a houseplant that he handed to Mama Ruth without explanation, and that she immediately named and placed in the window. Tuesdays, he and Devante talked about the bridge project. Thursdays, he and Mama Ruth watched their show while Devante cleaned up the kitchen. It was a household, a real one. Mama Ruth's room had a proper bed frame now, solid wood, the kind that didn't shift when you sat on the edge. She had picked out the curtains herself, a deep burgundy that she had pointed to in the store with the certainty of a woman who had known exactly what she wanted for a long time and was only now being asked. The dresser had a mirror. The nightstand had a lamp with enough light to read by. Devante had set it all up on a Sunday, while she sat in the doorway telling him the dresser was crooked. It wasn't crooked, but he checked 3 times. The text came on a Wednesday afternoon while he was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing load calculations, an unknown number. He opened it. "Devante, I've been thinking about everything. I know I hurt you, and I know sorry probably doesn't cover it. I just think we both deserve some closure. Maybe we could talk sometime. I hope you're doing well." He read it once. He set the phone face down on the table. Mama Ruth was setting out the rolls in a basket, moving from the counter to the table in her unhurried way. She set the basket down near his elbow and started to turn back. "Mama." He picked up the basket and held it out to her. "Take some." She looked at him. She looked at the phone, face down on the table. She had seen him set it there. She knew what that meant. She had lived long enough to know what a man looked like when he read something and decided it didn't require a response. She took a roll from the basket, sat down across from him. "How's the bridge coming?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Load distribution is clean. Should hold for 50 years easy." She nodded like this was the most natural answer in the world. "Good." They ate. That evening, after dinner, Devante went out to the backyard. The shed was gone. He had torn it down the week Adrienne moved out, himself, board by board, on a cold Saturday morning with Floyd handing him tools and not saying much. The lumber hadn't gone to waste. He'd had it repurposed, Some to a neighbor building a fence, some to a community workshop 3 blocks over. What was left was a concrete pad, smooth and level, that he had poured himself 3 weeks later. He stood on it now in the fading light. He looked at the space, the dimensions of it, the way it sat relative to the house, the angle of the roof overhang, how shade would fall in summer afternoons. He had it all drawn out already. He knew exactly what he was building. A covered patio. His mother had mentioned one, once, years ago, the way people mentioned things they don't expect to receive. Something with a roof, so she could sit outside even when it rained. Somewhere with real chairs and a table, and light in the evenings. He picked up one of the beams he'd had delivered on Saturday. He set it against the back wall of the house and checked the level. Straight. He was a structural engineer. He had spent his career calculating the weight things were built to carry. What would bend? What would hold? What needed reinforcement? What had been built wrong from the start and needed to come down before it could go up right? He understood, standing on that concrete pad in the quiet of his own yard, that he had always known how to do this. He had just spent 4 years applying it to everything except the structure of his own life. He picked up his pencil and marked the beam, one at a time. Methodical. No wasted motion. He began to build. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.